What's up, friends? Welcome back to the Shaw Local Bears Insider Podcast. I'm Shaw Local Bears beat reporter Sean Hammond. Joining me, as always, is our very own Michael Dwojak. And we have an ugly one to recap yesterday. The 49ers pretty much ran the Bears off the field there out in San Francisco. And I don't think that's what we expected. Obviously, we were pretty optimistic, and I think most of Chicago was pretty optimistic that this Bears team would take that positive momentum created when they fired Matt Eberflus and that Thomas Brown was fostering, bringing into the building. Michael, how surprised are you just at how bad that looked yesterday?
I was fairly surprised based on, what we heard all week, right? Like we kept hearing about like a different energy, a different output, a different, everything, right? Like it felt like you were kind of like, well, the offense seemed to be, you had some caveats to it, but then you were kind of like, well, the offense did better with Thomas Brown. And it seems like they really bought into it, right? So you kind of figured that would continue with the team and you get the new coach, the interim coach bump and all that sort of stuff. And you just kind of figured, man, the 49ers are injured. Like they're on their fourth string running back. They're not without their left tackle. They're without Ayuk. This is a good time to kind of get out of that losing streak. And what you got instead was the worst performance of the season from the Bears. A bad offensive performance. The defense wasn't anything better. And you're just kind of like, what? After all these weeks of being like Shane Waldron is the bad guy, Matt Eberflus is the bad guy, it was really up to the players at this point. And I mean, you kind of saw what happened, right? No one executed. It was bad. And I feel like we have a lot of questions even than a week ago that we had, because we're just kind of like, well, what do the Bears really have here? And how much of it is sustainable, moving forward?
You cannot understate how bad that first half was.
No.
319 yards to 4 at halftime. I mean, that is comical. That is like something that it's like straight out of a sitcom. Like you can't make that up. That's absolutely the worst half we've seen from the Bears this season, without a doubt. And that's kind of saying much after the way that Lions game started. And then, I mean, you could argue that was maybe one of the Bears' worst halves in years. And obviously, they got into a 24-0 hole. That game never felt competitive. The 49ers took the opening kickoff, 70 yards in 5 plays, I think it was, on that opening drive. And they took an early 7-point lead. And there's a lot of disappointing factors in that. I think for me, like the most disappointing and surprising thing was that this Bears defense has kept this team in games. You look at the way that Lions game started a week ago, and the Bears could have been down, 24-0 at halftime, but they weren't. They were down by 2 scores. They were down 16 points because that defense was standing tall in the red zone. Number 1 red zone defense in the league entering this week. I don't know if they dropped from that. I'd have to check. But the defense was not there yesterday. Kyle Shanahan's offense looked far and away much, much better than anything that the Bears could do on the other side.
Yeah, and you kind of wonder, what is that a result of, right? Is it a result of, obviously we heard about how things went in Detroit and obviously with Eberflus and that kind of stuff, but this was Eberflus's defense that, kept up the consistency of not breaking, and obviously you just kept bending. It was a great red zone defense. Sure, they gave up some plays, but they came up with stops. But, I mean, yesterday, that first drive, like, what was it, 5 plays, 70 yards? That was easy as heck. Like, you couldn't have drawn it better. Yeah. And you've seen a lot of people say maybe like, well, it's a scripted play, it's the first play. They punted on the second drive. Maybe you got some momentum. No, like the rest of the first half was just brutal. And it's like, I feel like it's hard to kind of put it all on the defense when it's like, well, when you can't pick up a first down in the first half, like you have to continue to go out there. Yep. I mean, you're asking a lot. And at some point, you keep like carrying the load all season. At some point, if you're a player, you're just like, man, like how much longer can I keep doing this? And I'm not saying that, the Bears defense like gave up by any means, but it is an emotional toll of just having to always carry the load and keep this team in it enough where they can maybe make a comeback in the second half, because that's pretty much what happened over the past 3 or 4 games.
It reminds me a little bit in some ways of the 2019-2020 Bears teams where it was similar. Like they weren't maybe as good as they had been defensively in 2018, but they were still a good unit. And it's hard to ask any defense to bend, don't break for so long. Because eventually the floodgates open for a game or two here and there, and you're going to have duds like that. And sure, Matt Eberflus is gone. Like that was his group. You wonder about just how much a change in play caller changes things for those guys. At the same time, you had a really good offensive coach on the other side for the 49ers. If you're watching with us here on YouTube, do us a favor, hit the thumbs up. That is a great way to support the show. We really appreciate it. Subscribe. And if you're listening after the fact on Spotify or Apple, keep an eye out on our Twitter pages. We'll let you know when we're going live. We're joining you a little bit later this afternoon. I had to catch a flight this morning back to Chicago. But if you're listening after the fact, also leave us a review on Spotify or Apple. That's another great way to support the show. As always, head over to shawlocal.com. You can read all of our Bears coverage, including everything we have up there from yesterday's game. Although, I don't know, man. I have a feeling Bears fans want to put this one behind them.
I think they want to put the season behind them, right? I feel like it's just kind of like what, we can get into the grand scheme of things. We'll have plenty of podcasts for that. But it's just kind of like at this point, 4-9, everyone was talking about, is this an 8-win team? Does Eberflus keep his job if they win 8 games? And, does Eberflus need to make the playoffs in order to keep the job? And, all the good momentum of Hard Knocks. And I over the past couple of days, I've just kind of been like catching myself, and I'm just kind of like, what? How are we here? I guess like, is it really that Hail Mary that really just blew this whole thing up? And I've seen the conversation a lot where it's like, well, how strong was the foundation and how strong was everything if a Hail Mary is going to blow up your whole season, right? Like this team could easily have been 5-2, sure. But then there are plenty of other opportunities. And it just seems like this team never really regrouped from that. And it's just really interesting and kind of surprising just to see, 4-9 at this point, like where we are compared to where we thought this team was going to be, heading into the final stretch here in December.
The Bears may never get that 5th win that Tyreek Stevenson was preemptively celebrating. That might never come. You look at the 4 teams on the schedule right now; they're all sitting in playoff position. The Seahawks won again yesterday. All those teams are looking pretty good right now. On paper, maybe that Seahawks game is the easiest win because it's at home, and I don't think the Seahawks don't necessarily scare teams as much as say the Lions or the Packers, but at the same time, that's looking like a pretty good football team right about now, and they're on their way toward the playoffs. We'll see how that goes down the stretch. But yeah, there's no easy wins left, and that's the problem. Like this team very well could lose out. We could be looking at an 11-game losing streak to end the season if that's the case. And I know there's a long way to go. Like there's a bunch of games, weird things happen, but that would be longer than the losing streak that kicked off the Matt Eberflus era 2 years ago when they lost 10 in a row down the stretch, Michael.
Isn't that insane just to have like 2 potentially, obviously we're not putting the cart before the horse or anything like that, but if they do get to that point, having 2 10-plus game losing streaks in the span of 2 or 3, 4 years, like that's an insane thing that I feel like kind of set. I feel like, the biggest thing has kind of been like, well, Matt Eberflus is the problem. That's the whole thing that's going on here. I feel like what we've kind of learned here during this losing streak, and I feel like you obviously learned a lot about a team during a losing streak, maybe than the winning streak, but I feel like there are plenty of flaws and plenty of blame to pass around, and I wouldn't say necessarily that it's a Matt Eberflus, a Shane Waldron problem. This feels like maybe the foundation wasn't as strong as we thought it was heading into the season.
Yeah, obviously we'll have a lot of time to discuss that down the stretch and over the offseason, but like if you're a Bears fan and maybe if you're listening with us, throw your thoughts in the comments as well. Like what parts of this team, what aspects of this group are you actually excited about, heading into 2025? Obviously, I think everyone's optimistic about Caleb Williams. He's played well, still hasn't thrown an interception in weeks. But it's not enough. They obviously they need to keep surrounding him with talent. They need to figure some things out defensively. But I do think Bears fans are optimistic about Caleb. I think you have to be. I mean, I know that they're losing games, but I don't think it's because of him. But who else? Like, what else are you really excited about with this group right now? Because I feel like yesterday's game just exposed maybe more flaws, maybe just showed that it was more than just a head coaching issue.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you're probably, you saw Roma Odunze score 2 touchdowns. That's obviously a good thing. It's good to get that connection going, but and obviously, like, we can be in the moment right now. Obviously, it's not you're not going to have like good, you're not going to have good opinions on a team when it has a 7-game losing streak. But I mean, TJ Edwards played well. Torrey Taylor, he had a good game, right? And obviously, I'm being a little facetious there. There's a lot of good, talented players on this team. Obviously, Jalen Johnson is good. I think TJ Edwards has shown you that he's a really good leader for this team. But it's just interesting where you're just kind of like, well, both lines are not good. I feel like we had a little bit of a time at the beginning of the season when we were like, oh, like maybe this defensive line can, work well opposite of Montez Sweat. And you've seen here in the past, I had in my story today, they have, I think it was 11 or 13 sacks in the last 7 games, where I think I don't know the numbers exactly of how much they allowed, but both lines are not good right now. And you've got offensive playmakers, you've got some good things defensively, but overall, I just feel like I'm kind of at a loss of being like positive, where yes, you have the quarterback and that's the most important thing, but then you're kind of conflicted and be like, well, what's around the quarterback, right? Like, what does he have to, who's going to protect him? Who's he going to throw to? And is he going to be forced to throw 40 points a game and that kind of stuff, where you're just kind of like, well, the quarterback is great. There's some good things, but really, what else is there really in there that's going to be sustainable for the future?
Yesterday was a stark reminder of sort of the difference between the good organizations and the bad, the deep teams and the not so deep teams. I mean, when the Bears lose Braxton Jones or Darnell Wright, it feels like their offensive line falls apart. When the 49ers lose Trent Williams for a game, it's like they didn't skip a beat. They have another guy who steps up and plays a really nice game. You can say the same thing about the running back position. Obviously, they were down to their number 3, and Isaac Aranda looked really good. Same thing on the other side with Nick Bosa out. It's like it feels like that's never been the Chicago Bears, or at least not in recent years. When you lose a guy, even like those back in 2018-19 when Khalil Mack went down, you really felt that, and the depth just is not there. And that's kind of what you're saying. Like, they need to build a lot more on the interior, both offensively and defensively. They need to have a lot more solid bodies in there and guys who you can depend on, because really it just feels like this team is maybe a little bit top heavy in some of those positions.
Yeah, it definitely does, right? Like, it just kind of feels like, I think Ryan Poles has been critiqued a lot about the way he's built this roster, right? Where you see the Detroit Lions, they lost a lot. Obviously, they were not good for a long time there, but they built and drafted through the lines and then went outward, right? And you've seen a lot of people, Bill Belichick is the biggest guy, I think, who's critiqued Ryan Poles for this, but he went the other way around. Like, he got DJ Moore, he got Caleb Williams, he got Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, Jalen Johnson, Jaquan Brisker, outside guys. He got Montez Sweat, obviously, for the defensive line, but other than that, like Javon Dexter, he's shown glimpses, but he hasn't taken that sophomore, jump that we wanted him to. Tyreek Stevenson has gone missing ever since that game against the Commanders. He's had some bright spots, but then obviously he gets fined for, taunting the Detroit player the other week. It's just interesting where it's just kind of like, I don't think there's a perfect way of building a roster. I don't think there's a perfect way of doing a rebuild by any means. It depends on the organization. It depends on what you have. But I maybe in a couple of years, you'll play this and you'll be like, Michael, you were completely wrong. This is like, it's fine. But like, it just doesn't seem like it's built on sound footing right now. It just feels like you've got some nice pieces here, but really the foundation, it really has a lot of cracks.
And look, I mean, I try not to overreact to a loss here and there, but we're not, though. I mean, this is 7 weeks building up. 7 consecutive losses here. Rick in the comments, guys, drop your thoughts, questions in the comments. If you're with us on YouTube, We'll throw some of these up on the screen. Rick says he has zero faith in Poles. How is it that the O-line? How is it that he played the O-line and can't spot any good offensive linemen? And yeah, I think it's fair to criticize that. I mean, it's easy in retrospect to say that because at the same time, I think a lot of Bears fans and folks in the media liked the Rome Odunze pick at the time. And I think Rome is a good player. He had a great game yesterday. Yeah. He had a great game after it was basically garbage time the whole second half. But still, he made some nice catches, scored 2 touchdowns. But I think it's fair to criticize the lack of options in the trenches. And this is Ryan Poles is probably going to never live the comment down when he said that this was the deepest offensive line he's built. And we saw what that looked like when a couple of guys got hurt. And clearly there's still, sure, it might be the deepest, but it needs to be deeper. And so he's still got to build on both sides of those trenches. And you can kind of say the same thing. I mean, the defense hasn't really played the same since Andrew Billings went down. I think that is a loss that has been felt pretty much in every game.
Yeah, it has, right? Like you were kind of like, well, the run defense isn't going to be as good. Obviously, he's a huge body and all that kind of stuff. And but I mean, let's be real. Like nothing has been right. Like Andrew Billings has always been in there. You've always needed, if you're an opponent, 2 guys to kind of stop him just based on how big he is. And that obviously opens things up for the rest of the defense. And then, Thomas Brown talked about this today, but, if you're not pressuring the quarterback, like open plays are going to happen. George Kittle's going to be open for a 23-yard pass, right? Like you're going to have big plays and that kind of stuff. So, it's just interesting just watching how all that happens. And something, we'll get into the game, but a comment that I really wanted to get into in this podcast with you, Sean, was Caleb's comments yesterday about, what his responsibilities are and that kind of stuff. And I found that really interesting because, heading into this season, I feel like we were all kind of like, this is a great locker room. This is a great, room. Like, watch the way they responded in the second half last season under Matt Eberflus. Like, yes, the winning wasn't there. The talent wasn't there. But, they figured out a way. They're back together. And I feel like you've kind of noticed throughout the year the amount of times different players saying, well, we're not being held accountable. Well, we're not doing this. I see guys, not lifting at the right time, showing up late and that kind of stuff. But you saw that in Caleb's comments yesterday. And I don't know if you have it like right in front of you, but it was essentially just like saying, like, listen, like it shouldn't be on me to tell you to get to your meeting on time. You get to lift up early and that kind of stuff. And that I feel like speaks volumes from a rookie quarterback, right? Where I feel like we've known about Caleb his entire life. Like he's worked his entire life to get to this moment. And then he's met by, it seems like, based on his comments and other comments, by a bunch of players that maybe aren't putting the same amount of effort that he has been putting to get to this point.
I found this comment to be very notable within that press conference. I tweeted it out. I'll read the full direct quote here. The question was essentially, okay, you have 4 games left. You're the quarterback. You're a team captain. How do you galvanize this group and keep them focused over this last month of the season? And Caleb's direct quote, he said, "My job is to lead. The captain's job is to lead from the front, even when it's tough. My job is not to get you up to come into the facility to do your job, to come in and have after hours treatment and all those different things. My job and our job as captains is to go out there and lead the guys the right way. It's an internal thing to get up and do the job over and over again." He's essentially saying his job is not to motivate you to do your job. When you're here, when you're on the field, I'll be a leader. And this is me paraphrasing now, but it's not my responsibility to get you to show up excited for work. And it is an interesting comment. I know there's a million different ways to lead, and you can lead, whether it's business, whether it's sports, you can lead in different, there's different successful ways to be a leader. I think that what he's saying, I kind of get what he's saying from the perspective of, this guy's a rookie. I know he's the quarterback. I know he signed up for this, but if you're the rookie, if you're the new guy in the room, are you really going to be the one to stand up to some of the older veterans who've been around the block? I do get that on some regard, but I just think that the quote was was super notable and a really interesting sort of insight into how Caleb thinks about this stuff.
And I think it tells you a lot of where they are as a team, right? Like I think they're not at the spot that I think we all imagined or thought that they were. I think we're all kind of under the impression that this is a really good leadership team, and they're going to bring Caleb into the fold, and he's going to be part of that leadership. He's going to grow. They're going to nurture him and all that kind of stuff. And those just felt like a very, maybe not a bold thing, because it's not like he called anyone out. He didn't say like these guys aren't doing anything, so and so isn't, whatever. Like he was respectful about it, but it's just such a very noticeable quote from your quarterback, your rookie quarterback, who it feels like he's just kind of been like, I'm putting words into his mouth. I'm not saying that he said this, but it just gives off the feeling that he's kind of surprised that this is where they're at right now. Where I feel like you probably come into a position where you're like, well, the Bears weren't actually like the worst team in the league last year. They just made the trade, and that's how they ended up. And this is a good spot for Caleb. But then he gets here, and it kind of seems like, oh, maybe this isn't as good, or even as the leadership isn't there as much as we all expected it to be, given what this team was last season.
The implications of his comments would suggest that maybe some people aren't putting in going the extra mile, and that's essentially what he is saying. And I don't know if he's exactly accusing anyone of that, but he's saying that it's not his job to get you to go the extra mile. I guess is more what he's saying. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I thought it was kind of the most notable thing he said after the game, and a little bit of an insight into the way his brain works. We'll see what this team, can these guys pull this together for these last 4 games and at least put some competitive efforts out there. I mean, after yesterday, it's hard to see that happening, but I also don't think that they're going to be that bad every single game. I do see some comments. Crooked Commish has a comment here. He's saying that it seems like they're checked out, but I want to discuss this other comment he had. Thanks for joining us, Crooked Commish. He says it will be interesting to see if they stick with the 4-3 defense or switch to a 3-4. Because obviously they're going to have to hire a new coach, and that could change everything with the scheme of the defense. And really, that's kind of why it would have made sense to move on from Flus as soon as possible, as in last year, if you saw this coming, because you have built your defense in his image. Ryan Poles has spent 2+ years building the defense that Matt Eberflus wants. And now do all those guys really fit a different scheme if you're going to go a different direction? Does Tremaine Edmonds fit in a 3-4? How do these pass rushers fit? What exactly is that going to look like? That's a really fair question.
Yeah, it is, right? And I feel like it's kind of the reason why, you kind of, not that Ryan did this specifically, but obviously he drafted for what he thought Eberflus wanted, but this is kind of a major reason why you just kind of build your team with the best players, right? Or whatever, not for a specific scheme, because you never know what the situation is going to be. You don't know if you're going to fire a coach, and your next coach might be like, no, I want to run a 3-4 or 4-3 or whatever. I want to, play nickel all the time. I don't want to do that. I want to use 3 linebackers. Every coach is different, is going to bring a different defensive coach if he's an offensive-minded coach. And that's kind of the reason why you see a lot of successful teams. They build out with the best players available. They take whatever the needs are sometimes, and they don't look too often about they'll talk to their coach and they'll see what they want to do. But at the end of the day, you always need to take the best player available, because you don't know what your future is going to be. So it will be really interesting. And I think the biggest thing is, and I don't know if they would do that, but when you're looking for a new coach, you can't pigeonhole your new defensive coach into what you have, right? Obviously you can be like, well, what can you do with this? Is there a way that we can make this work? But you shouldn't put limitations on your new head coach saying, well, you should only bring in a coach who runs our defense that we currently have because we spent the past 2 years building this. But and that needs to be very clear when Ryan Poles or / Kevin Ward is making this decision is going to do that.
Yeah. I'm certainly not advocating that you hire a 4-3 coach just because of the scheme. I agree. Like your new coach is probably going to have some thoughts, just like Matt Eberflus made Jalen Johnson earn his spot in the starting lineup 2 years ago or whatever during OTAs. Your new coach is going to come in with very little like preconceived notion of who these guys are. We talked to Jalen actually last Friday about that, and he's in a good position. He's got the long contract now. He's pretty much safe, but he said that we've had meetings, us players, informal meetings. Just we've talked about how there's going to be a new coaching staff. If pretty much everyone is going to have to prove themselves again. Only the guys with the 4 or 5 year contracts, like a Jalen, like a Cole Kmet, are really have any security, and that can be a scary thing because these guys, a lot of these younger players are on shorter contracts. They're very expendable from the front office's perspective, and that's how it has to be if you're bringing in a new coach. Like if a certain player doesn't fit his scheme, then you're going to move on. And that's just an unfortunate reality of the situation that the Bears are in. I mean, there's going to be some growing pains, some changes over the next year. And obviously there has to be when you're playing the way that they are right now.
Yeah, I think it's all going to be really interesting how Ryan Poles kind of handles this, right? Because obviously you've got the talent, but then maybe the vibe wasn't the right vibe you thought it was going to be, right? Like obviously we saw in Hard Knocks, he really built strong close relationships with these guys. You saw with Adrian Colbert how hard that was, the Bayless Jones decision. And I'm sure that Ryan Poles cares a lot based on what we've seen and heard from him from over the years. So it'll be really interesting to see how he's able to evaluate both the talent that he has on the field, but also, the personalities that he has in that locker room, right? Because I think that's going to be a really important thing where, depends on what defense your new coach is going to run, what they want to do. But you also have to kind of take a look back and be like, well, it seems like things kind of splintered off this year. Why did they splinter off? Well, how did things get so broken so quickly? I think those are all questions that Ryan Poles is going to have to answer. He's going to get a good chance to look at it based on what happened this year in the next 4 games. But there are a lot of questions that he's going to have to determine. Is this player someone I want to build upon who can be around here when we're successful and good in the next few years? Or is this someone where I'm kind of like, well, maybe they're expendable, maybe I can get them, and someone else values him more?
CJ in the comments says that he's wondering how Chris Morgan, the offensive line coach, has survived Luke Getsy and Shane Waldron. And yeah, it's fair to criticize that group. I mean, I think that they have played better when closer to healthy. Obviously, it was pretty ugly there for a couple of weeks when the tackles were injured, when you had Tevin out for a game there. But it's fair to criticize that group. They have been far from perfect. The other thing, though, too, is like they can't fire anymore. There's nobody else to fire. Like this staff is already bare bones. Like you can't keep doing that. You can only do that so long. You fired a coordinator, you fired a head coach. There's still a lot of work to go around. I don't think that I wouldn't expect any more changes to come over the last 4 weeks.
No, I mean, you're not just going to fire people, right? Like at this point, what does that really do? You got 4 games left in the season. You're 4-9. I don't really know how much that accomplishes, but going on that offensive line, I am curious just to know what your standpoint is. Where I feel like obviously, this offensive line has given up a bunch of sacks. It's not been good. How much I don't know if blame is the right word, but how much of the share do you kind of put that on Caleb? Where I feel like the conversation has been big over the past couple of weeks where, Caleb hasn't thrown an interception in, I think it was 7 games right at this point. But they also talked about him holding on to the ball and not putting the ball in that situation to be intercepted, right? So I am curious to know, how much do you feel like based on what we've seen at this point, once this offensive line is healthy, is this a line that is doing its best and Caleb is holding the ball too long, or is this a 50-50 share? I'm just kind of curious to know what you think about that situation.
I'm not trying to cop out with the question either, but I really do think it's on everybody at certain times. I mean, there's times where, and you can really see this, when we're watching live at Soldier Field or when you're watching the All-22, like there's plays where legitimately nobody is open. And so that's partially on the receivers too. Like sometimes they got to get open. You could argue that might be on the play design and the play caller. There's other times where, guys get beat on the offensive line. It happens. And then there's situations where Caleb's holding on to the ball way too long. And I think there were a couple examples of that yesterday. He's already set the Bears sack record this season for a single season with 4 games to go. He's up to 56 now. That is one more than Justin Fields had a couple of years ago. That wasn't really on my radar coming into this season. I got to say, I did not expect to be sitting here after, how many games is this? 13 games with 56 sacks.
It's just bizarre, right? And I feel like it kind of goes back to the whole picture of where do you go from here, where it's kind of like, well, it's not a one fixed solution at this point. It's not just telling Caleb to throw the ball more. It's not improving the offensive line. It's, there's Rick kind of mentioned in the comment there, you've seen so many like plays already shown online where you've got 3 or 4 wide receivers in the same area right next to each other, right? Like, is that player execution? Is that coaching? Like, I think that's the biggest thing where you're just kind of like, wow, like this isn't let's buy ourselves a left tackle, let's buy ourselves a guard here and we're going to be set. This is we need a better play design, we need better play execution, we need better protection, and we need better decision making. And it feels like it's kind of the worst case scenario because it's not a quick fix. It's a lot of different facets that are going to need to happen in order to fix this problem coming into next year.
I mean, frankly, you need a fresh new offensive mind to come in and fix that, I guess, is kind of what we're getting at here. Like it's all over the board. Like there are issues with that offense at every level. And I just added it up, Michael. You're right. Like over this 7-game losing streak, he's averaging 5 sacks per game. You could probably make the argument that it's that same stretch where he hasn't thrown an interception. And you could probably make the argument that maybe he's holding on to the football a little bit too long. There's some luck involved in that. I mean, there were like early in the game, there were like back-to-back passes that probably should have been picked off and weren't. Right. Sometimes that's just the way the ball falls and you get lucky and you don't turn it over. And other times you have some stupid interceptions that you're watching the replay going, how the heck did that just happen? Rick just threw in the comments. Eric Washington is definitely not blameless in all this too. I mean, like that just didn't look good yesterday. I mean, there were some times where they seemed like clearly Kyle Shanahan, and I'm not like, it's hard to go against Kyle Shanahan. Like he's one of the best offensive minds in football. Most defensive coordinators are going to lose that head-to-head matchup. But yeah, that was probably the Bears' worst defensive performance of the year. And unfortunately that's going to reflect on the coordinator in charge. Yeah,
it seemed like, zone defense wasn't working at all. Obviously, I think you saw the Bears pressure a little bit more than they were against under Eberflus. But yeah, I mean, at some, I think the biggest thing is after a certain while, when you're a coach, you just need to adjust on the fly, right? That's how successful teams do well. They do the adjustments before halftime. They do the adjustments, looking at the play call and looking at the results. And you're like, all right, this didn't work on the first 2 drives. We need to change something up. And on both sides of the ball, that just didn't seem to happen. And I don't know whether that, Thomas Brown said that he wasn't, too overwhelmed. It was his first game having to deal with being a head coach instead of, only worrying about the offense or offensive play calling. He was on the ground. He said that didn't really seem to play too much of a role into it, but it's the adjustments, right? This league is a game of adjustments, not game to game, but like quarter to quarter, like drive to drive. And you didn't see any adjustments on either side of the ball. And I think that's the biggest thing where it's just kind of like, when you're not learning from your past mistakes, I think that's how you're doomed to, repeat them. And that's just clearly what happened there, where you saw the big chunk plays. You saw Kittle get open a bunch of times, and you didn't really see anything different other than maybe a few more rushes here or there in the second quarter.
It's like, how do you lose George Kittle so many times?
Yes.
The guy's, he's not exactly small. He's not exactly an unknown. I know this 49ers offense has a lot of weapons. There were a couple times when Debo touched the ball where I kind of went, oh, right, he's still here. He's on the team because they do have so many weapons. And that's been an underperforming team on that side. And certainly they've been banged up. But Clearly, the Bears were outmatched in this one. We normally do our winners and losers on Monday. Michael, we've talked about a lot of losers. You got anybody else you want to touch on?
I joked about this, but I did have Tory Taylor in my 3 things that went well yesterday.
All right. Hey, we got a winner. How about that?
I mean, he punted well, right? I think he averaged, it ended up being 49 yards a punt, but I think he had 3 punts for 58 yards or more. They used them a lot, but I think he was able to execute, and I feel like that was important. Obviously, in the grand scheme of things, you're probably like, should we have used the punter in the 4th, 5th round? That's an interesting take at this point, where we are as opposed to where we maybe were in April. But it's good to see that he was able to pick up some momentum because there have been some up and down performances. So it was good to see an up performance for him on Sunday.
Well, hey, I mean, if you're going to draft a punter in the 4th round, he at least better play well. So it's at least going well in that regard. Rick in the comments says the fans are losers for sticking with this team. Yeah, I can understand why you're feeling that way at this point. It's been a tough stretch, and there's some tough matchups coming up. At the 49ers is not going to get any easier. At the Vikings, rather, is not going to get any easier next week. And Detroit's on the horizon at home, Seattle, and the last one in Green Bay. It's not going to be an easy stretch here. But let's see what Thomas Brown's team can do with a little bit more time I know it was 9 days is a long week in NFL standards, but still that's a lot of change in 1 week, and you hope that they can bounce back a little bit and make it interesting next week against the Vikings.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest. At this point, you're trying to play spoiler to your 3 division rivals, right? You're trying to ruin their seed. You're trying to maybe kick them out of the playoffs somehow. I don't think that's possible. Their combined record is like 5 losses, right? Isn't it something insane?
Yeah, I think the Vikings got to be getting close to clinching a playoff spot too. I would think. I saw the Eagles. The Eagles clinched one yesterday, but I don't know where the Vikings are in that.
Yeah, but regardless, these aren't just 3 like relatively good division rivals. These are 3 of the top teams in the conference. It just worked out this way. I think a lot of people were like thinking that the Bears were going to be in this position as opposed to the Vikings. I think a lot of people got the Sam Darnold prediction wrong, but it'll be interesting. I mean, you've got 4 games to figure out. Can Caleb continue to grow, continue to be a leader, develop some chemistry with Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, maybe you see Keenan Allen. Obviously, we got to see what that situation is going to be like moving forward. But I think at this point, you're just trying to develop Caleb, give him more experiences, and not make him shell-shocked or not make him like develop bad, habits at this point. That a new coaching staff is going to come in and try to teach away, right? I think that's the worst thing you can do. I think that's obviously the reason why a lot of people wanted to line up the quarterback and the head coach together so you didn't go through this experience. But the Bears decided to go this way, and I think at this point you just got to make sure that you don't do anything or, stunt any of Caleb's growth at this point and just get him to the end, get him healthy, get him experience, and, start getting ready with that new coaching staff whenever you do hire him.
Well said, Michael. Well said. All right, we're going to get out of here. Thank you for joining us live here on YouTube. Once again, hit the thumbs up if you're with us live. That is a great way to support the show. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, leave us a review. Always head to shawlocal.com. Read our stuff over there. We got lots of Bears coverage every game day and throughout the week. That is the number one best way to support us is to head to shawlocal.com and subscribe. He's Michael Dwojak. You can find him on Twitter at mdwojak94. I'm Sean Hammond. You can find me at Sean_Hammond. This has been the Shaw Local Bears Insider Podcast. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and have a great week.